Hello, I'm Mark Kordazinski, if you don't know me already. Um, I'm a licensed designer for Blank Quilting. I have several collections out now, but the one I'll be talking about is Crystalline, which is a textured solid that is printed with an overlay of a metallic or a pearl finish. So you have a very multi-dimensional fabric. It's not just depth with color, but it's also depth with light. The background absorbs some light and the finish reflects it. And what I'm going to be showing you is the simplest way of knitting with fabric. So the simplest thing to do with fabric, and what you need to do when you turn fabric into fabric yarn, is you need to cut it into strips, and you also need to tie the lengths together or join the lengths together to make a continuous piece of fabric yarn. There's many ways of doing that. The simplest way is by cutting it, tearing it, and tying it together. But you could also cut it with a rotary cutter, a straight edge, a pinked edge, a wavy edge, and that will produce more fraying than if you cut it with a straight edge. This will produce fraying, so will the wavy edge or the zigzag edge. Straight cut will retain the edge and it won't fray as much. I like fraying in my work. It's something that I just think adds a lot of textural interest to almost any product, if it's a quilt or here in the knitting. This is a collection from Blank quite some time ago. And in this piece, I did a intarsia knitting, which means I place color in certain areas of the knit. But all of these colors, fabrics here, were stripped using the wavy cutter and then joined together to produce a yarn that was used here. Now this was actually put together by using a metallic thread every once in a while and a bead. So you could join the thread by tying it together, which I'll show you, or by sewing it together, or you could glue it together. So to produce something like this was done on a size 15 needle and washed, and it still has a very loose, very soft hand, kind of limp for me, for what I like to do. This I'm doing on a size 11 needle, and it's got a lot more bulk to it and a lot more stability. So I'm going to be knitting. And what I'm doing is I like the natural look of the fabric, and since I am fussy and I also waste a lot of fabric, I like to put the interesting part of it in, so I'll probably cut the part with the wording and also the color windows. And all you do is take, I'll just cut from this edge since this has already been torn, and just cut maybe about an inch into the fabric every 3/8 of an inch. You would have to experiment if you're using different kind of fabric. This is a cotton, so I found that 3/8 of an inch is pretty much the smallest I can cut, because anything smaller will just continue to pull apart. And then I just take this and hold it, okay? And that's gonna happen every once in a while until you get it started, and then you rip pieces of fabric. And you just continue to rip. And you do this for hours and hours and hours, because you're going to need a lot, depending upon the size of the project you have, you're going to need a lot of fabric and a lot of strips.
How do you connect the strips up?
Excuse me?
How do you connect the strips together?
Here I'm doing the simplest way of making fabric yarn, which is snipping it, tearing it,
Oh, no, how do you connect the
and then tying it together.
Oh, just tying it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So then after they're stripped, I will then sit in front of the television or whatever and just pull off all of these loose threads. It's a long process, but most everything is that we do. Quilting isn't done in a few hours if you're making a large quilt or a large project. So then I process the yarn by pulling off those threads, which also then gives me this ragged edge. And here you can see I've already pre-processed all of the 14 colors of the crystalline. And what happens, as you saw on the first one, the tag ripped off. So I started with the second. So I have a piece of yarn that's twice as big. So I'll use that because then that gives me a variegated, thick, thin type of yarn. And once I have all of my yarns processed, I'll just start maybe tying on 4, 5, 6 at a time, depending upon. I look forward and go, okay, I've got a really dark section here. I may want to start going light, but maybe I want to do from here to, I'll just tie on a red. And I just match the ends, tie them over, and then make a small tail. And as I knit, the tails will go either to the front or the back of the work, but on a rib stitch like I'm doing, it really doesn't matter what's the front or the back. So you could either leave it as it is and let them fall randomly, or you could pull all the tags to one side and have lots and lots and lots of ends on one side and a clean finish, or vice versa, nice clean finish. So it's up to you to choose how you want to have the piece look. When I knit the larger piece here, I was using bamboo needles, and I found that there was a lot of drag.
Okay, so you need, because of the, yeah.
I guess the cotton and also perhaps the pearl finish gave it some drag, but here I'm on ebony needles, and this seems to be a lot smoother and a lot slicker. Or steel, you would have to try.
Yeah.
Here we're working with cotton, but I've worked with wool and synthetics, and different fibers react differently with different needles, so you would have to try which one works best, and then just go ahead and start knitting. Let's pull them through, let's get it going. And like I said, I'm just doing a
Ribbon stitch, yeah.
I'm just doing just a ribbing stitch, exactly.
This is a nice little stretch.
That's the reason I use it, because this is the yarn. This yarn is not forgiving like a regular yarn is. A regular yarn you'll pull and it'll have a nice little give. This, it doesn't give at all. So in order for me to really get the stretch I need when doing a project, I'll use the rib stitch. And then when you put it on a pillow, if it's a little bit small, this thing opens up to be able to fit. But then you could do all the same stitches that you do on a normal, with normal yarn. With here, you could do cables.
So this would be like the face of you attach it to another fabric?
Then to make a pillow, what I did is I stabilized it with the quilted back, because I wanted to somehow include quilting in the project. So the back is quilted, and then the front is hand sewn here, because this is, you can see this had a form in it, how this stretched. So this gives it stability, because otherwise the pillow is just going to be floppy, unless what you really, really want. Because I did one that had a knit front and a knit back, and it just was like this deflated souffle. It was just, and here I've used the cotton, and I also used a knit. This is a knit.
Okay.
So you can strip almost any type of fabric. And the nice thing about this is if you use a fabric that's got some sort of surface design or interest, that will show through on your yarn. And that is basically the process. It's very, very simple.